Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from Post Malone, 12 Carat Toothache. It's been about 3 years since the last Post Malone album, Hollywood's Bleeding. This is the first post-pandemic release for Post Malone. A fact that I feel like I shouldn't need to point out, that I really don't want to have to point out, but it feels like so many albums are falling into this new, very immediately played out trend of using the coronavirus pandemic as some sort of creative muse. It feels cheap, it feels generally fabricated, especially coming from big musical acts and artists who are using it as a very low-hanging fruit source of inspiration. Now, don't get me wrong, the references on this album to the pandemic are actually fairly minimal, but there is some bleed here, especially in the track like Cooped Up, the second single off of this album that has a pretty garish feature with Roddy Ricch that sort of highlights the melodrama of Post on this song, who is trying his best to convince you of how sad he is. That may actually be the biggest gripe that I have here. The whole emo rap thing that has popped up over the past few years does have some amount of merit. I'm not really the biggest fan of that sound, but there are artists who can, to a certain extent, pull off that sound. But what Post Malone is doing here, like on the first track, Reputation, seems to be trying his best to convince people that he is so tortured. I feel like I might use the word melodrama a little bit too much in this video, but this is one of the most melodramatic albums that I've ever heard. Every issue that Post has here is largely caused by his own actions, like on the track When I'm Alone, where Post is talking about how he feels guilty for his infidelity in his past relationships. And there's certain ways that a lot of these subjects could have been tackled or framed that would paint things maybe in a little bit more of a genuine way, but what this feels like is kind of a monetization of being a scummy person who is pretending to come to some kind of realization and make positive change. And those issues become even more clear when you account for the fact that Post can't even really keep his messages straight on the same fucking record, like the track Insane, which seems to tread like right over this apologetic coming to the light kind of thing he's doing, and in this song he instead talks about how all of his exes are crazy, which I guess could be a good basis for a track if it wasn't a fairly weak trap rap song, but you know, it could be good if there wasn't such like a direct conflict in this album's narrative. So thematically there's a pretty good amount of inconsistency here. I would personally say that that's fairly unsurprising. But hey, you know, how's the music? How's the sound of this album? We got about 14 tracks here, all of which follow a pretty straightforward theme after the intro song Reputation. These are slower, generally much more brooding tracks that tend to come from a pretty mixed bag. Many of the songs, at their worst, are pretty standard, maybe underwhelming trap beats. At their best, there's some really nice, very simplistic, and even moving passages like the instrumental for Love-Hate Letter to Alcohol with a Fleet Foxes feature that is actually pretty good. But for all of the moments here where the music is fairly well written and thought out, there are just as many blunders on Post's end, mainly in his like half-whimpered singing. I don't really get why or where this very wavering vocal delivery is coming from, or why it's so prevalent on this album. I mean, he goes for it a lot, and it isn't particularly great. There's moments where it does kind of work, but there's just as many spots where it feels forced or weak. A great example is the track Wasting Angels, where Post is kind of hitting a broad range of his vocals. This track kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of everything that is going to be being belted out on this album, and there is some pretty alright moments, but a lot of spots where I can't really help but wonder what the idea was in the vocal booth, like what were they trying to get at with these vocal takes? And the follow-up track, Euthanasia, more directly leans into that sound, or I guess more directly leans into that issue, which is a shame because I actually really love the very lo-fi backing track this song has. It kind of feels reminiscent off of like a cut off of like Ghosts by 9 Inch Nails. I think the worst moment on this album, though, setting aside the vocal blunders or even the fairly okay instrumentals, has got to be the track Waiting for a Miracle. This song is nothing. The track is so far up Post's ass that he might not be able to come back out. The lyrics on this thing are very much an empty gesture to mental illness, and it's sad and it's depressed for like the vanity of it, and frankly it's just kind of gross. And the follow-up track, unsurprisingly, is one of the better songs on the album, with a feature from The Weeknd, who is as good as he's ever gonna be. Post, in comparison, sounds kind of like a complete amateur on his own track. And I think that's one of the main takeaways that I'm getting from this album. The whole thing just sounds really amateur. There's not really much that's being said here. The beats, with the exception of a couple of the tracks, aren't very poppy, so it's hard to take the angle that these songs are maybe not meant to be dissected so much. So with that in mind, the intent of this album becomes a little bit more clear. This is another, in my mind, pretty shallow cash-in on Vogue depression. And I'm not saying Post isn't allowed to have issues. I'm not saying he's not allowed to be depressed, but if this album is supposed to be presented as a believable and relatable summation of the tortured inner monologue of a man with some serious problems, then it's a really vapid and ankle-deep level of depression that feels largely like being sad for the fashion of it. This album could have been a lot more thoughtful in a lot of ways, and I can't really help but feel that this was a calculated, intentional grab at whatever funds can be shaken out of the pockets of people with actual serious problems. Anyway, 12 Carat Toothache is, I'm thinking it's a solid 2. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe if you liked this video, and check out my Reverb, my Instagram, and my Depop. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.